Hey guys, welcome to another edition of Notes by Mr. Novak. I'm going to talk for a while here today. These are actually kind of a long set of notes, so kind of settle in here. It's gonna be a bit kind of a more complex topic, macromolecules. Okay, so we're looking at macromolecules. Macro is big, right? So we're looking at kind of these big molecules that we have that kind of are the building block of our life. Now, if you want to think of it that way, okay. A couple of things we'll be looking at are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Okay, and all of those things have a few common atoms. All right, and they accomplish all of life functions. Okay, so these play very, very vital roles in our world and in our lives. Okay, so let's get into it here. Macromolecules, all right, are big, but we can break them down into what we call their monomer. Okay, so every one of these has a monomer, mono meaning one. So it's the simplest unit, as you see here, of our, let me do this quick, hide that. Simplest unit of each macromolecule. For example, proteins are amino acids, lipids, fatty acids, so on and so forth. Okay, you put a bunch of these together and you get what we call a polymer. Okay, put a bunch of monomers together, you get a polymer. If you think about it, it's just like a bike chain, right? One little unit, you put a bunch of them together, you get a whole bike chain. Okay, or links in a necklace or something like that. All right, so we're going to go through all these here, and you get to learn all about the macromolecules. Okay, so first one are carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay. Now the cool thing is they're in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio, one carbon and two hydrogens to one oxygen. For example, C6H12O6, right? Glucose. Right? That's the most common one here, right? So again, that's a 1 to 1 ratio of carbon to hydrogen to oxygen, right? Always, 100% of the time, that's how it is. Okay, so the monomer is glucose. What do carbs do for us? You can see there's a whole bunch of things, right? The big one though, energy, right? They're going to give us kind of quicker energy, all right? And so that is what we're talking about when we say like, oh, it gives you energy, right? What food are you going to eat? Boom, carbs, right? So here we go. Monosaccharides, 1 unit. We have some sugars, right? Monosaccharides, saccharide sugar, um, that are what we call just monosaccharides. And so you can kind of see down here, there are 3 of them. If we were to count up all the carbons and hydrogens and oxygens, it'd be a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. And you can pause the video and do that if you really, really want to. But what we're looking at here are simple sugars that give us immediate energy. All right. So examples: fruits, cookie, candy, honey, all those. One thing I really like to talk about is kind of how it relates to food a little bit, and then like other parts of our life. So monosaccharides, carbohydrates. But I think carbohydrates always as like bread, pasta. Those are kind of the common ones, right? But really anything, right? Fruits, cookie, candy, honey, anything that is very like simple sugars are also carbohydrates. So there's kind of this misnomer when we say carbs, carbs are bad, but it's like carbs aren't bad. We need them. They give us energy. They do other things in our lives. That and like some very good things like fruit. We'll find out vegetables are also carbohydrates. So a lot of people try to play off like diets that like are carb free, and that's not good, right? Because we need these things in our life because they give us these vital nutrients as well. Okay. How do we make these glucose monomers? Is through this process of photosynthesis, right? So plants, right, will synthesize glucose, they'll create glucose with the sun's energy, water, carbon dioxide, and we'll make glucose, okay? And then those can be made into plant parts, which we can eat, or they can be combined with other monosaccharides or other sugars, and we can get disaccharides. So di means two, so two sugars kind of linked together. Also very, very simple, and they break down really, really fast, okay? So both the monosaccharides and the disaccharides break down really fast. With that, okay, they give us quick energy, and they are very sweet tasting, okay? So lactose is a big one. It's in milk, okay? Kind of fun. We'll talk about enzymes in a little bit. If you are lactose intolerant, you cannot drink milk, so you can't break it down, right? That's just kind of fun. But anyway, sucrose, table sugar, a couple, again, monosaccharides. You can see up top, a couple monosaccharides linked together. And that creates our disaccharides very fast, right? We're talking if you're like diabetic and need something to eat now because your blood sugars are low, it's the monosaccharides and disaccharides that you're going to be eating, okay? They break down within like minutes kind of thing. Next ones are polysaccharides. Poly is many. So we have these big, giant, long chains, right? So this is the general kind of drawing, by the way, of a monosaccharide. Okay, looks like that. And then we put a bunch of those together, we get a polysaccharide. These are long, complex chains. Okay, so here we get our breads, right? So lower there, lower left. And we get the other cool one, our vegetables. Okay, so very complex, takes our body a long time. When I say long, I'm not talking like weeks. I'm talking like hours, right? So again, it's kind of a relative thing too. So hours it breaks down, right? Which is kind of funny because people will be like, "Oh, I'm going to do a pasta feed and I'm going to have, carb overload so I can run a race tomorrow." But realistically, you're not using that energy from that pasta to run your race or something like that. Marathon or something to do that. The other kind of cool thing is, and this is like above and beyond what you really need to know, but I think it's really cool, is these breads, we have the enzymes in our body to break them down. The fruits and vegetables, the fruits, I should say, are linked differently. We cannot break those down. And so when you're like trying to lose weight and stuff, and you're like, oh, low carb diet or no carb diet, it's like you're supposed to eat a lot of vegetables, like you're eating a lot of carbs, but it's the carbs you don't break down. So what happens? You go to the bathroom, you just crap them out, right? You just let them go. So that's what we talk about there. Okay, so again, polysaccharides, these super long chains, and this is just like a snap. We're talking like hundreds. Okay, and digestion takes longer. Okay, so those are kind of our carbs. They do some other things as well. So, like, what do they really do? Okay, so energy, obviously. Okay, we got short-term energy, and we can also like store it. Okay, so like plants will store it as starch. Like if you think of like a potato, it's got stored energy in it, right? Starch. And animals like you and me will store it in our muscle cells as glycogen. So like when you're working out, you're using right energy right away, and the energy you're using is all that stored in muscles. And so like you might feel like, oh, I got my crash, I'm exhausted, and you get like this second wave. Well, what's happening there basically is that you are using all the energy that's in your muscles. Okay, and then your body will start converting other energy storages that you can then use, and that's where you get like your second wind. Okay, and so we store these short term in our bodies, animals, and then plants will store it as starch. Okay, the other things it does is structure. Okay, so like cellulose, which is what plant cell walls are made of, are then that. Okay, they are these long polysaccharide chains. So again, it's not just energy; it's structural and some other things as well. Okay, and then here, just for fun, I just thought I'd show you this. Is there are some other uses of carbohydrates as well, between like chitin, right, uh, cell walls of fungi, or you can see here like the little exoskeleton, right, and then it's also in bacteria as well. Okay, so that kind of wraps up carbs. We're gonna move on to our second macromolecule, which is lipids. Now, lipids is kind of cool. It's made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And the carbohydrates made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. The difference is that there's way more hydrogen in a lipid than there is in a carbohydrate. Remember, carbs is a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. Here it's like hydrogen and then a little bit of oxygen, a little bit of carbon, okay? Or a little bit of carbon. There are basically 4 types of lipids: fats, oils, phospholipids, and waxes we'll look at. Okay. And the cool thing, and you guys probably know this, is that they do not dissolve in water, right? You come some oil and water, it doesn't dissolve. Some fat and water really doesn't dissolve. Okay. And so it's kind of like a key, and that's because of what it does, we can use that kind of property to do stuff. Here is our kind of monomer, right? This fatty acid, the long hydrocarbon chain. So again, when I talk about like there's so much more hydrogen, for every carbon, there's a hydrogen. You can see that over here, right? Hydrogen, 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 right? All the way around. A lot of carbon too, but look at 2 oxygen. So again, we know this is not a carb because there's only 3 oxygens and a ton of hydrogen. Okay. And so what we have, right, is these fatty acids can be saturated, unsaturated, or polyunsaturated, which just means talking about how many carbons and hydrogens there really are there. Okay. And I get into it later, so I'll hold off on that. Okay. So what do we use lipids for? Long-term energy storage, right? We have these pockets of fat in our bodies and stuff like that that we're storing. Okay. So when you convert, when I was talking about before, the carbs is you convert over to other energy storages, what you're storing or using now are those stores of lipids. Okay. So if you're running, you crash, your body will eventually convert those other energy sources, i.e. the fat in your body, and you can start using that. Okay. And like super good athletes can actually like have less of a second wind. There's more continuous energy. Their body's just used to converting that a lot more easily. Okay. Obviously, they help insulate the body. Kind of cool is a cushion. All right. So that they're cushioning our organs. If you look at like, you ever done this before? Like I shot a deer and you pull out the heart and you can look and see there's fat around it, right? And that's very normal. Same thing in our bodies, right? Very normal to have fat around it, which is very healthy because it's protecting. Okay. If you have too much, obviously it's not good. If you have too little, that's not good as well. Other things are lipids are steroids as well. Very important ones in our body, testosterone, estrogen, cortisol, stuff like that. And they help waterproof. So like if you have a plant, you dump some water on it, you'll notice that the water beads up, right? It's because there's some like wax on it, right? Two main types of fats. We have saturated and unsaturated. So I talked about these a little bit before. A saturated fat just means that you have a carbon and then two hydrogens. Carbon, two hydrogens. Carbon, two hydrogen. In between the carbons, we have a single bond. Remember the chemistry of single bonds, double bonds, triple bonds, right? And so you can see here, there's a carbon with single bonds between all of them and a hydrogen sticking off of that. That's saturated. Basically, it's full of hydrogen, right? These things are solid at room temperature. Okay, think about like you see up here, butter, right? Butter is a saturated fat. Okay, unsaturated, you see here's a double bond, right? That's key. You see a double bond or two or three, whatever it is, you know you have an unsaturated fat. So now you see we're missing a hydrogen on each of those carbons. It is not full of hydrogen. Okay, these tend to be liquid at room temp. Okay, you can think right here like olive oil, stuff like that. The cool thing is they're liquid because you can't combine them that close to one another. So they become liquid at room temp versus the saturated, those can bond a lot closer together and they are solid. So all those are the types of fats that we have. Now, why does this matter? You need fat, right? Not only does it cushion your organs, but parts of your cell, right, like your cell membrane right there, are made out of fat. So here is a phospholipid. This part's the phospho part, right? It's the phospho right there. It's the phosphate group. And then here's the lipid part. That's terrible writing, but it'll work. You can see that again, tons of carbons, tons of hydrogens. So we know it's a lipid. Okay. Kind of cool is that these are what make up our cells. And this part up here, the phospho part, likes water, and this part doesn't like water. You know, lipids don't like water. And so they orient that way and they help protect you in the inside of your cells. So again, you need these lipids, they are very important. Okay. You also need it because they make steroids in your body. Okay, so you see all these steroids here, and a lot of these like are really important. They help kind of drive the functions of your body. So without steroids in your body, you wouldn't be able to function. Okay, basically. So lipids aren't just important for our cells, cushioning organs, but they actually help with the functions of our life as well. And so again, I want needing all things in your body. Steroids are very important. Those are made out of lipids. That's how you get those. Now, kind of cool. You can tell it's a lipid 4 rings, right? It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And that exists in all of them. And then what's different is like the groups that get added on are different. That's how you make different steroids. Okay. I'll skip that one. All right, next macromolecule, proteins. Proteins, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and then we start adding nitrogen. So if you see a nitrogen, right, like right here, nitrogen, right, you should know right away that that is a protein, okay? The monomer is right here. It is the, let's see if I can erase. Is it gonna let me erase? I want to erase that quick. Okay, go back down. Give me a second. This whole thing is an amino acid, okay? In an amino acid, all the stuff I'm circling is the same. We have a bunch of different amino acids, basically 20, okay? And the difference between each amino acid is this R group, okay? That's what makes it a different amino acid. Kind of fun. Where do you get proteins from? You probably know this: meat, right? Like chicken, that kind of stuff, eggs, all that have protein sources, okay? So that's why you need all that. If you don't eat that stuff, your body will start breaking down its muscle, just right here in this next slide. And you start getting like poor muscle formation, your hair gets kind of crummy. So eating protein is actually really important because it does a ton of really important things in our body, right? it's a storage, right? We can store protein. It helps transport things like hemoglobin helps transport oxygen around the cell. Okay, hormones as well, insulin, stuff like that, that helps regulate your body. It makes up a lot of stuff. Your nails, your fingernails, your hair, membranes, muscles, all that are made up of proteins. And so talking about structure is a really big one. Okay, and then enzymes. We'll talk about enzymes quite a bit in depth next week or something like that. And so enzymes are really important too to our body because they are like basically they help in every single cellular reaction. So enzymes are really important there. And so proteins, again, critical to our kind of life. This is kind of cool. So when you make proteins, and you get to talk about how to make a protein in our DNA unit, right? Basically, you have this sequence of amino acids. So you have like amino acid, right? It's this big link, like hundreds and hundreds of amino acids. So each of those circles is an amino acid. What happens is that amino acid, that's called the primary structure, okay? Just as like line, the order of amino acids, okay? What happens then is that will fold. You can either get a sheet like this and it just kind of kinks back and forth, or you can get a helix. Okay, so down here, so you have here's your secondary structure, right? So this is right here. This is your alpha helix. This other one on the right is or this is the helix. That's the sheet. Down here, then is what happens is it'll like keep folding over and over, and you'll get different types of folds, and that makes a tertiary structure, and then quaternary structure. And some of these proteins are so big that you can combine other proteins, right, to make even larger ones. So that's kind of cool about proteins, right? The bummer is they're kind of sensitive, right? So what can happen to proteins? They can denature. Okay, and that's like if you heat up a protein, the bonds that hold it together will just break, right? If it's in the wrong environment, it doesn't work well. The bonds holding together just break. Instead of like here's like a up top right here's like a good protein, it's doing its thing. You put it like in a high, really cool environment, the bonds break, and now here's a denatured protein, which doesn't work. And then what happens is your body doesn't function or whatever, and we'll get into that a lot more in our enzyme unit. So, but proteins are really important. They play a vital role in our body. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and proteins are and nitrogen are kind of the key there. Okay. Last one. Okay. Fourth, final amino acid. Fourth final macromolecule. Okay, our nucleic acids. Two big types: DNA and RNA. Okay. Um, these transmit and store genetic information. Okay, so DNA is like every cell. It's what kind of tells your body what to do, what color your eyes should be, how tall you should be, what color hair, all that kind of fun stuff, right? The monomer is a nucleotide. Nucleotide is composed of a phosphate group, a base, and a sugar. So here is the base. This is the sugar, and here is the phosphate group. Okay, so those three things make it up. So that's kind of the general structure down here of our nucleic acid, specifically the monomer, which is called the nucleotide. Anytime you see something like that, you should know that it is a nucleic acid, right? So the key, I think, is the phosphate group. Okay, if it has a phosphate group on it, take a look. It might be mixed up with the phospholipid, but probably look at the other structures, and it's probably going to be that. Okay. And so that's kind of what we have for nucleic acids. We're not going to get into it too much right here because I want you to kind of save that for our DNA unit. All right. I talked about this real quick. Just want to touch on this. All right. So each thing can give you energy, right? Except for nucleic acid. Those are the only ones that have no calories per gram. Okay. And so we talk about storage of energy and stuff like that. So in a gram of food, right? Carbs will be 4. We give you 4 calories per gram. Proteins give you 4 calories per gram. Lipids will give you 9 calories per gram. So thinking just about like life in general, like we talked about, lipids are storage energy. There's 9 calories per gram. That's like almost twice. It's over twice, really, right? Barely of a carb or a protein. And why is that important? Because when you start looking at like the structure, right? I'll do it like this for the sake of time. There's so many bonds to break, and these are hard bonds to break that they're storing a lot of energy. Okay, And so breaking those bonds is really hard. And so by doing that, though, you're getting the energy out of it. Okay, whereas the carbs and proteins don't have that kind of same structure. So that's why we get all that. It's also really important when you're talking about, well, hey, depending on what I'm going to eat, right? That's important to know. So that's what I got for you today. All right, I'm going to